Hey everybody, this is Mike. Welcome back to the shop. Today in the shop we have a 2010 Buick LaCrosse with a 3.0 liter high feature V6 engine. Now this particular engine gets a bad rap for, in my opinion, it's unwarranted. It's actually a very good engine. However, there's some idiosyncrasies that need to be addressed and expected with this engine. And I don't think it's only related to this engine. A lot of the technology that's going into modern engines with cam phasers, variable valve timing, hydraulic tensioners, all those kinds of things, they all rely on oil to not only the normal jobs of oil, meaning lubrication and extracting or removing heat, but also as a hydraulic function to control other components in the engine. So the high feature GM is one of those. It has 3 timing chains, multiple guides. I think each chain has 2 guides, 4 cam phasers, 3 tensioners, and the tensioners and cam phasers rely on oil pressure, clean oil, to produce oil pressure to actually have them perform and function as designed. Now, I think these get a bad rap because people go off of the, what do you call them, oil minders, oil monitoring system. I'm not a big fan of those, and here's my reasoning. Is they're based on a set of algorithms based on driver use and so forth, and I just don't. The failures I've seen and the engines I've been into where people have used and relied on those oil monitoring systems for their service intervals, the inside of those engines are sludge ridden. I know they're not. You get that sludge buildup in there and it acts as an insulator, so it's holding heat in. The oil's not performing its duties reliably, and it definitely takes its toll on the hydraulic functions of the oil and the components. So don't let these cars go, and I don't care, it's not just the high feature, it's any of these modern engines. Don't let them go 7, 8, 10,000 miles because the oil minder hasn't kicked on yet. I draw the line at 5,000. 3,000 is probably a little premature. My personal vehicles, I have them set, in my mind, I have them set on 4,000, and that gives me a little leeway. So if I happen to have some time and I've got it in I'm cleaning it or whatever, like the wife's car, and it's at 3,800, and I know I've got a busy week the next week, I'll change the oil. If I've got a busy week and it comes up on 4,000 and I know I've got a couple other vehicles I'm working on or some other things I'm doing, I can't get to it and it goes to 42, 43, it's not the end of the world. I will not let them go past 5, but 4 is where I usually shoot for. And I'm usually a few hundred miles one way or the other. Very seldom am I even over 4,500. Now, in some respects, people are going to say that's wasteful of oil. In my opinion, oil is cheap compared to a catastrophic failure when a chain stretches to the point that it jumps time and a piston contacts a valve. That's a major repair. What we're doing here mostly on this, well, pretty much all of on this car is pretty much preventative with the premise of we're fixing a couple of leaks. So background on this car, the couple that own it do a very good job of maintaining it. I know a little bit of the history on the car. I worked on it about a year or so ago, did some just spark plugs, just a light tune-up, spark plugs, I think he had a O2 sensor code, so I diagnosed and troubleshot that a little bit. Just kind of give it a good once-over. The car now has 100, and it started weeping a little bit where the timing chain cover meets the block on the number 1 bank. Now the number 1 bank on this is the one back at the firewall, and there where that meets the head and the block, there was a little bit of a weep. Well, that weep has now gotten worse to where it's actually leaving some drips on the guy's garage floor. So he brought it to me a couple weeks ago to have me look at it again, and the car is running perfect. There's no codes, there's no erratic running, no nothing. On these engines, when you start getting chains stretching to the point where the cams are not in the position that the computer thinks it should be. You're going to start getting some P00, 16, 17, 18, and 19 codes, and what those are camshaft correlation codes. So none of that's going on. The car's purring like a kitten. It's sitting right at 130,000 miles. Under normal good maintenance, I've seen these engines go 120, 140,000 before they start throwing some of these weird codes and change or stretching to the point where they need to be replaced. Worst case I've seen is probably 80,000, where the vehicle was neglected and it needed a lot of work at 80,000. This one's not to that point, so this is going to be a good one. Now, like I said, just make sure on these you do keep the oils changed. Like I said, oil's cheap compared to a catastrophic failure. These are a good solid engine, like I say, but they do get a bad rap. So keep that in mind. So let's go ahead and tear it apart. I'm going to, I've also got a water pump and some upper and lower radiator hoses. When I looked at it a couple of weeks ago for the guy, I noticed that the hoses are getting a little bulging in a little bit, couple spots and getting a little hard. They're not crunchy, but with 130,000 miles, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and change the hoses. The heater hoses all look freaking awesome still. It's just the upper and lower radiator hoses. I did put a belt on it last year and plugs and everything, so those will be okay to reuse. So we're just going to dump the coolant, flush the coolant system out, new upper and lower radiator hoses. We need to get into the front of this engine, so the intake manifold's got to come off, the rocker covers have got to come off. I will pull the spark plugs just so it's easier to roll the engine over when we're setting the timing. You have to set the timing up on these engines in 2 steps, or 2 stages, if you will. You have a second stage and a first stage. We'll get more into that when we get to that point.
I now have the cam covers, rocker covers, whatever you want to call them off. One thing I'm going to check here is to make sure that the phasers are in good condition. When there's no oil pressure, there's a pin that pops out and locks the cam to the phaser for startup, and then usually as soon as you get oil pressure, then it allows the solenoids to take over and operate and vary the timing on the cam once the ECM calls for it. So I've got the actuators removed, as well as the cam sensors, intake and exhaust on each bank. But now I'm just going to take a wrench and I'm going to put it on the flat here, and it should be solid, meaning that pin should be engaged. If you get any play back and forth out of the cam where the phaser stays in place, then that is telling you that the phaser's bad. Now this one's moving a little bit, but it is actually moving if you see, it's moving the entire phaser. It's not just moving the cam, and you can tell. Look at the slop in the chain there. And this car is not throwing any codes or anything, but you can see how it's already climbing up out of the teeth in the cam gear there. Same thing on the back. The back's good and solid. So that's telling me my phasers, Sorry, I didn't mean to bump the camera there. That's telling me that the phasers are in good condition. So we don't need to get those. I did not buy those. They make a kit that comes with all 4 phasers, but where this was not having any issues, timing wise, I did not warrant it. So, but I figured I'd check it first thing as soon as I get it apart, just in case I needed to get them ordered before I started to go back together. So we're good there. I've got to move the power steering pump down here. This is showing up. Down here at the rear, I need to remove a couple of bolts and pivot that power steering pump out of the way. I think I'll pull the water pump off here before I pull the timing cover, and I've got to pull the harmonic balancer off. And then this front timing, and the a bolt here on the front of the, this front bolt here on the alternator needs to come off because it goes into the timing cover. The back one goes into the cylinder head. Back to, I got the power steering. It's kind of hard to see here, but there's an upper bolt and a lower bolt. I've got those removed through the holes in the pulley. Then I just took a small heel bar, wedged it between one of the fasteners here, and just gently press it, push it back out of the way. It only needs to go back about half maybe 5/8 of an inch in order to clear these couple of bolts on the timing cover, which brings us to the water pump. Some people will pull the cover off with the water pump on it. If you're not going to replace the water pump, that's probably the best way to do it, because there's a gasket that seals between the cover and the block, and then between the water pump and the cover. So if you're not going to replace the water pump, then you can leave this intact and pull it apart, and then you have one less gasket surface to have to clean. Now I want to show you for reference. I left the water pump in. All the fasteners are out, but I left the water pump in place. So I want to show you a reference here. Just from the center of the water pump up about the 10 o'clock position, there's a threaded hole right between these two case bolts or timing cover bolts. Just adjacent to the water pump, there's a threaded hole. Once you get all the fasteners out on the timing cover, you can thread a fastener in there, and I think you can just use like the alternator bolt over here and thread it in, and it will press the cover out away from the block. That does not go into a water port. It goes into just basically an open cavity that's sealed on the lower side. So that I wanted to leave the water pump in place to show that. So once everything top side's ready, the power steering pump back out of the way, you can come down below here, and I just undid this. There's two, move the light here. There's 3 fasteners that hold this evap pump on. One here going forward into the frame, and then these 2 here you can get from the engine bay. Damn it. For the engine bay up inside, undo those, and then you can pivot that out of the way and gain access here to the harmonic balancer. So the bolt is removed. I've got a puller on it, and it's coming off. It's an interference fit, but it's coming off pretty easily with a just by hand with a 3/8 ratchet, pulling this harmonic balancer off. So I was right at the end of this rod, and I was able to just grab a hold of the balancer, or the harmonic balancer there, and just walk it the last 32nd of an inch off is all. So at this point, I'm going to lower it back down. We'll go back top side and start removing. Actually, I'll probably remove as many of the fasteners as I can down here, and then we'll go up top side and get the rest. Once you have all the fasteners out of the timing cover, I just grabbed one of the, I think this was off the alternator or something, the 10 millimeter by 1.5 thread pitch, threaded into that hole that I pointed out earlier, just up about 10 o'clock from the water pump. Thread it in there, and now go slow to make sure you have all of the other fasteners removed, and boom, there it's pressing the timing cover out away from the block. You can hear it popping loose there. So it didn't want to pop loose from this corner over here, so I just took a little heel bar and pressed it against, and the cover come right loose. Just held up at the back here, the same place. I think it's a sealant that's holding it in. And there we go. And there's the cover removed. And I'm looking down at it, and I'm not really seeing, I'm seeing all the guides in place, which is good. Not seeing anything. That's a little bit of sealant drop down. I'm not seeing anything out of the ordinary. Now I don't know if this is going to show up or not, but I will point out that you can tell how much the chains have stretched by look at how far that tensioner is sticking out. That's out quite a ways, actually. As is the rear one. The right bank, which would be bank number 1, is also quite a ways out. So these chains have got some slack in them. Actually, if you look right here even,
If you look right here, you can see how the chains are climbing the teeth on the sprockets. So this is good timing on this. There was no issues, no performance issues, no codes, no nothing. But I wouldn't have wanted to let this go much longer. So I hope the client's happy with this, because it was needing to be done. So the engine is in stage 2. So you can see the dot on the crankshaft sprocket lining up with the mark right below the tensioner shoe on the oil pump body. That's stage 2 timing. Come up on the top side. This is the right bank as you're looking at it from the flywheel forward. So the right bank, even though you're facing it, it's on the left. This is also bank number 1 because it's the furthest one forward. So you're going to have an R right here on the intake phaser. There's the little triangle. I've marked it out here on the sprocket. The back one's a little harder to see, but there is the triangle on it with the marking on the sprocket. Should be 10 links between the marks, which there are. So this engine right now is in stage 2 timing. So I also have the little cam plate. You don't necessarily have to have these tools, but for the price they are, you can pick them up for 20 bucks or so, 20 to $30. And they are a good reference for, if nothing more than peace of mind. The other one over here on this side is offset, so you can tell, because this is set up for stage 2 timing, but it'll be on the left bank head. So basically this engine right now is in stage 2 timing. So for that being said, I'm going to go ahead and remove the secondary chain, guides, and tensioner for the secondary on the stage 2 right bank. Like I said earlier, this will be the first chain removed and the last one installed. So once I get that done, then we will roll it over 2 more times, well, a little more than 2 times. And the other timing mark on the crank is at 5 o'clock position, which should line the left bank up for the timing marks. So let's go ahead and get this chain off, and then we'll roll it over. Tensioner removed, hydraulic tensioner removed, tensioner guide, main guide, and chain removed. Now these sprockets are locked in place with the back plate. I just went ahead and left that there. So I'm going to remove the plate on the left bank so that we can roll it now and put the left bank or put the engine into stage 1 timing. So for that, I'm just going to, I've got the crank bolt in here. I'm just going to roll it over very slowly. Now see how that rolled over? That's why you do not want to have your fingers anywhere near these sprockets, because the lobes, I've got the spark plugs out of this engine to make it a little easier to roll over, but the valves, depending on where the lobe is at on the valve at the time, those valve springs have quite a bit of pressure on them. So if the lobe is just past its fulcrum point, it can spin over if there's not another one to counteract it with compression, or with the springs. So there shouldn't be any compression because spark plugs are out. But either way, I rolled that over, and now I lost my mark. Okay, there it is. It's actually about the 12:30 position now. We got to roll it over to the 5 o'clock position. So we will roll it over gently to the 5 o'clock position, and the mark is on the oil pump body. Should be right about in there. Let me double check and confirm that. Yep. The timing mark is at the 5 o'clock position, lining up with the one on the valve body. But you'll notice these phasers are not in the correct position. They are both timing marks are pointing down. So remember, the crankshaft turns 2 times for every 1 revolution of the cam, because you have power and exhaust, power and intake, and compression and exhaust that share strokes. So let's roll this engine over 1 more time, and you'll see these timing marks on the left phasers come up into position.
Oh, and it spun over again there. Probably 45 degrees. And also on the back of these two cams, the flats should be up. I forgot to show you where the flats were, but I didn't look at them, but I know they were not up. Okay, so let me double check and see where that timing mark is. Okay, that timing mark is pretty much right on. But there is the timing mark on the crank with the oil pump, and this is in stage 1. And if we come up top side and look, we have the L for left, the dot facing up, straight up. We have the L over here with the dot, and there should be 10 links between them. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So there's 10 links between them, or if you go dot to dot, it should be 12 links. So that, now the engine is in stage 1, and we can verify that by putting the plate here on the back. See how the top of the flats on the back of the cam are flat, and that that plate is now locked on those cams, so those cams cannot turn. The right bank over here, I left the cam plate on it, so those cams shouldn't turn. So we should now be able to pull the primary chain off, the crank to the 2 idlers, the tensioner and the guide for that, and also the secondary chain for the left bank, tensioner guide and chain off of that. So we should be able to pull everything apart. There is the engine with both secondary chains and the primary chain, tensioners, guides, idlers, all removed. The only one I've got yet to do is the short guide down on the oil pump. But anyway, the cams are locked into position. I have a lot of cleanup to do. All of this needs to come off where the water pump is and every mating surface. You do not want to go through all this hassle, put it back together and have a leak. I believe the leak on this car originally was back here, because that's kind of where, looking from the bottom up when the owner brought it to me, it looked like it was right about where the head and block seam was, which kind of stands to reason, because as these engines, well, any engine for that matter, as they expand and contract, those joints where 2 components meet is generally the point where your leaks are going to start. So not all the time. I mean, they can start in the middle, but generally that's the first place to be suspect of. And that's where it kind of seemed it was on this. Above that seam was dry for the most part. There was a little bit that had wicked up, obviously, but from there down was quite wet. So I'm pretty certain that is where the leak on this originated. So I'm going to get this, I got rag stuff, I've got absorbent pads down along the lower cross member here and on the floor of my shop also to catch as much as I can. Now, I also have towels stuffed in the front edge of that oil pan to keep everything, the chunks and so forth, out of the oil pan. So I'll come in here and clean all this up, and then I'll clean the timing cover or whatnot up. You don't need to see that, but I wanted to give you a good overview of what this should look like. And the front of the block is all cleaned. I pulled all the paper towels out. I've wiped everything down over with a Scotch-Brite. Brake cleaner on a paper towel, on a lint-free paper towel, and gone over everything. The new guide down on for the crank, or for the primary chain, is installed. The new sprocket on the crankshaft is installed. Don't forget, after you pull, so I left all the paper towels tucked down in the oil pan here when I was cleaning everything from the oil pan up. So once I got all that cleaned, sprayed down with brake wash, wiped down everything. When I'm sure everything from that parting line up was clean and not going to be touched again, then I went ahead and pulled the paper towels out of the oil pan and cleaned from the oil pan where it mates the block, and captured those 3 bolt holes along the bottom. and run some Scotch-Brite over that whole area, so and brake cleaner. So all that, the whole front surface area here is clean and ready to accept the timing cover once the chains are installed. Here are the new components in the milling. There's the milling part number, 3-753S for this particular engine. It comes with 2 new sprockets, or excuse me, idlers with the bolts. It comes with all the tensioner guides and chain guides with all the bolts. The only one that does not come with the new bolts is the one that mounts down to the oil pump. It comes with a primary chain, 2 secondary chains, and all 3 tensioners. So these are all wrapped in plastic when they come. So I've just unpackaged everything and laid everything out here. Now, one step I also do before I actually install the chains is I will put a little bit of motor oil in the bottom of a tin pan, and I will soak these. I just usually toss them in there and let them soak overnight. But anything's better than nothing. You want to get as much oil down into these pins and everything as possible before you start it up. I know some people will put them on dry and not have a problem. I've just always, I don't know, 35 years now, whenever I've done timing chains, same thing with like lifters and things like that, I always just soak them in oil an hour, half hour, or preferably overnight before I put things together. So, and then I will also take and just put a little bit of like Molly assembly lube. You probably don't need to. This is all UHMW. It's designed for wear, but I'll just take and smear a little bit on those right before the chains go on. Next up is to clean the timing cover, which is dirty on both the inside and the outside. Although the inside looks pretty good because this engine you can tell, obviously it was very well maintained. So there's not a lot of sludge, well, there's no sludge buildup. So you can obviously tell that the owners of this car took good care of it. So we will clean up the inside and the outside. I've got a new crankshaft seal and all 4 seals for the valves, or for the VVT valves. And then it has a new gasket for the water pump on the inside there, which is a recessed, like a square O-ring that fits in there. And then a steel with rubber gasket on the outside. As far as water pump, I'm installing a new AC Delco water pump with a Malley timing cover set. Comes with the new inner water pump, outer water pump, all 4 seals, and the crank seal. And then also Malley is the outlet, upper radiator hose outlet port gasket. And then it also comes with 3 new gaskets, stamped steel gaskets for the tensioners, but seeing as how the tensioners come with them as well, I probably won't be using these ones. As I'm cleaning the sealant off of this timing cover, I thought this would be worth mentioning. Number one, I'm just using plastic razor blades to clean the majority of it off. It works really good. It does not gouge the aluminum. Then I'm coming along with my carbide and just kind of dragging it along to remove the last little bit of, well, not the last, but the bits and pieces that the plastic one left behind. Then it will go to the solvent tank, and then I'll come along with a Scotch-Brite pad and clean the very last little bit of residue. Now, worth mentioning here is if you look at some of these bosses that are cast into the timing cover, you'll notice if you catch them just right in the light, you'll see that they actually have a cross hatch ground into them, as does most of this machined surface. Do not file these down. Do not use a mechanized polishing wheel or a roll-lock disc, anything like that, to remove the gasket material. Do it manually. It's not that much time, but it will be so much cleaner, number one, and number two, those cross hatches in all these machined surfaces are there for a reason. They are there to retain a certain amount of sealant as you're putting this back together. So you notice the channels here, that's where the sealant goes, and then you'll continue it around a little bit. Now anywhere, I believe the book calls for like 3 millimeter, which is about an eighth of an inch. Anywhere, or the majority of the distance around these. Now, wherever the head and the block mate, or there's a seam. I think the factory service manual calls for 5 millimeter, which is about probably 3/16, a little bit less than a quarter, a little bit more than 3/16 of an inch. So see, yeah, it'd be about 200 thousandths. So a 5 millimeter. So make sure that you pay attention to that. If you knock down any of the material off of any of these bosses, this cover will sit in a different position on the block than it was designed to. So I just thought that'd be worth mentioning. Do not go in there and start removing these with power tools, because it will, good chance it won't seal up properly, because there won't be a certain amount, there won't be the proper amount of sealant retention. Things are progressing as we're getting ready to go back together. The chains have been soaking in engine oil for overnight. I've got the cover all cleaned. Now some people, I don't know, some people don't go to the depth that I probably do on cleaning the exterior of parts, but the people I do work for seem to appreciate the little extra attention that I give to things. So I would encourage you, if you're gonna do it, take a few extra minutes and clean the outside. Even though it's not internal to the cleanliness of the engine, it shows a little bit more pride in workmanship. So the new crankshaft seals driven in, the seals for the valve VVT actuators is driven in. Let's see, I got new O-rings for the cam sensors. Those will go on as they go back in. The area around the water pump has all been thoroughly cleaned and run around with a Scotch-Brite like everything else to get it nice and clean. All of the little plastic guides, I made sure that all those are in place in the cover. Let me flip the cover over and you can see the inside. So there's the inside and how clean everything is. Make sure you get everything out of these little grooves, because that's where you're going to put the sealant, and it's going to hold the sealant in place. The new quad ring for the water pump is in place. Again, anywhere there's going to be a junction of the head and the block and the oil pan, I put a little bit heavier sealant on. Now, my sealant of choice is AC Delco. I think they used to call it just ES, engine sealant. It's a part number 10-2006. The actual GM part number is an 88864346. There used to be a different number, but superseded to this one a few years back. This is hands down my favorite sealant. I've been using this for probably 25 plus years now, and I use it on pretty much about everything. Anyway, that's the sealant I prefer. You can use anything you want, but that's the sealant that I prefer. That's what it looked like was on this. Also, when I took it apart, anything that was exposed to oil in here had turned black, but anywhere on the outsides where it oozed out, or in like these bolt holes, was this gray, looked like the GM ES that they use in the factory. Also, while we're talking about chemicals, another thing that I like to do is I will take a little bit of Silglide and run it around the surface of the seals, so that when the components are going back together, they don't go together dry and they don't catch and roll. So I do it a lot with O-rings and everything, but I still do it on these seals as well. So I just take a little bit, put it on my finger, run it around the inside, and as everything's going back together. Now, granted, the crank is going to be the only one that goes over, and it's going to be the balancer that goes into it. So it's not like you're pressing it over a shaft that's going to be tight fit. But still, I go ahead and do it beforehand, just if anything, so I don't forget. So this will go on. I'll put it on the seals for the VVT valve actuators, even though they are going to be going in at a much later time. But at least that way I don't forget. So as we're going together here, I put a little bit of Molly, just this liquid Molly stuff, on all the guides. Not necessary, I don't think, but I hold habits, I guess. For startup more than anything. So I go ahead and do that. The chains have been soaking overnight in engine oil. Let's see what else. Oh, on the tensioners and on the tensioner side guide where it's moving against tensioner. I also put a little bit of blue Loctite on the fasteners. There again, it doesn't call for it in the factory service manual, but just something I've done for years. On that pivot bolt where it moves, I've always just put a little bit of blue Loctite on it. So, okay, that being said, the engine is in stage 1 timing. Both timing marks are in the correct position. The plate is on the back of the cam here. So I'm going to, first of all, I think I'm going to install the idler machine surfaces here on the back side. The left bank, so it's going to be the right in the video, has got the smaller sprocket to the rear, the larger one out front here. Just a little bit of high viscosity lubricant for assembly lube, basically. I'm just going to put a little bit here on the back side of that machine surface where the oil pressure will feed that, at least enough for startup. The other sprocket is going to have the same machine surface on the back side, but it's going to have the larger sprocket to the back, smaller sprocket to the front, because the smaller one is for the secondary chains. And those get torqued to 43 foot-pounds. There's a socket here. It should be a 16 millimeter. All right, so first timing mark, the link goes on, and booms. Right on the money there, on each side. That probably should have staked that underneath that first, then come around. Top two timing marks are on, guides. Tensioner guide is in place. Now, if you got sometimes you gotta get creative with a mirror, or if the motor was lower, you could probably, if you had it lower down, you could possibly look down underneath the frame rail here. But it's the idler sprocket on this side is right in line with the frame rail. So if you take a light, shine it into that hole, and look at it, the plate, the yellow plate, is evenly spaced in the hole in that idler. So this timing, this stage 1 secondary is in time. So I'm going to torque the guides to 18 foot-pounds. Actually, I filled about as far as I could by hand, and it wasn't enough. Okay, that snugged a little bit. Now we torque them to 18 foot-pounds. Okay, and let's go ahead and put this tensioner
in. Double check our marks before we pull the pin, but let's put the tensioner in. And this one's going to be kind of the triangular looking one. So pay attention to those because they generally only go on kind of one way. Socket there. So there again, this is the kind of triangular looking one. Make sure it lines up with the oil passage. Make sure that it lines up, and then it lines up with the guide. I'm sorry, I'm struggling reaching in around this camera. I keep bumping the dang thing and knocking it off the fender. Primary chain is slid in place. Timing mark on the left idler. Timing mark on the right idler. Timing mark on the crank pulley. The guide on the the oil pump is in place. Now I'm going to grab the guide, the upper guide. For the primary chain, and it goes kind of slid behind and loops around like so. And threaded in. So it goes right below the water pump face, or the mounting on the block there. Before I tighten that up, I'm going to crawl in underneath and double. Now the lower one on the crank, you can see from below. Actually, I'm going to, much as I hate to do this, I'm going to grab the camera. Okay, so I hope you can see that. There's the timing mark on the crank and at the 5 o'clock position, and the timing mark on the, on the yellow pin on the yellow link on the chain, the timing mark on the crankshaft sprocket, and the timing mark on the oil pump all coincide. Now coming up on the top side, going back down in. You have the timing mark on the left bank idler, right bank idler. There is the guide I just installed. The guide on the oil pump is already in place, and I will put the tensioner with the other guide on it down in that lower position down there. Now here is the tensioner with the shoe on it for the primary chain. It gets tucked away down underneath, way down to the bottom. Let's see if I can hold this camera down here and do a quick. So there's the timing marks down on the crank. There's the timing marks on the left bank idler, passing over the water pump and the guide to the right bank idler. There, I'm kind of guesstimating where that hole is, and hopefully you should be able to see the yellow link through that hole. So now that all that is complete, the tensioner is in place for the primary. The engine is still in stage 1, so the upper guide is torqued to 18 foot-pounds. And now the tensioner will get torqued to 18 foot-pounds. Okay, tensioner's torqued. Everything's in place on that one.
I'm going to do one last quick visual. Make sure timing mark, timing mark, timing mark. Everything's good. Pull the pin. So with stage 1 completed, I've double, triple checked everything. On my marks are very good. I'm going to remove the timing plate at the rear of the engine. For the cams being parallel with the head for stage 1. And I'm going to grab my ratchet and I'm going to roll. The timing mark is at the 5 o'clock. I'm going to roll it over. I'm going to say it's close to 8 o'clock position. Now, stage 2, the right bank is not going to move because I don't have the secondary chains hooked up to it. So it is still locked in the position from when we first pulled the first chain off. Remember I said earlier that's going to be the first chain off and the last chain on. So we will slowly turn the engine over. This is the first time we've rolled the engine over since we've had all the chains off. So that timing mark should go to about the 8 o'clock position. I'm having a hard time seeing it from up here, so let me kneel down and get down into position where I can see it better. Okay, right now it's about 6:30 position. Still have a ways to go. And I'm going to hold that right there is the 8 o'clock position on the crank. Now we'll take the angle plate for the left bank and we'll see if it fits on, which it does. It slides right on. So we know that that is in stage 2 timing for 2 reasons. Number 1, we've got the crank in position, and number 2, this plate matches. So we will grab the chain for the secondary on the right bank. Again, this chain's been soaking in oil overnight, so we will come in and put that chain on that mark, and it should automatically line up with that one. And it should come down, match up with that one. Now, it can be off a tooth because there's so much slack in the chain. It can technically be off. So you want to make sure, because if you push all the chain tension one direction, I'm going to stuff a rag down right there with the chain drip on that, other than a nice clean mating surface for the cover. So taking a mirror, looks like the same thing. We want to line up with the hole. And it's right there. So we kind of want to center it. Oop, see, it just jumped. I let slack go on one side of the chain and it jumped a tooth. So let's grab the guides, get them in position. And that's lined right up with the timing mark. So we will put the tensioner guide in place. And again, I'm putting just a little bit of assembly lube on the pivot point of it, of the bolt, and some blue Loctite on the threads. For this one. I have to kind of go by feel back behind this one. You can't get your head and both hands down there at the same time. Okay, double check the timing mark. Bingo, right on the money. And the upper timing marks, boom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 links between them. So that's good. Go ahead and snug the tensioner guide down. Yeah, you want to be careful you don't pull those pins on those tensioners before you're ready, or you'll be resetting the plunger in them. The timing cover is prepped with engine sealant. Right before that, I went over the cover as well as the block with some brake wash on a rag. The area, I kind of marked the inside here. The area right here, 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 and here. I think the factory service manual calls for 5mm. Everything else 3mm bead of sealant. Mainly thing is you want to make sure you just kind of get it down inside that groove that's machined around here. And then I just went a little slower and built it up just a little bit more. You don't want to cake it on so much that it oozes inside, but you want to have adequate amount on that it covers. So the heavier areas just slightly are where the head and the block meet. I put just a little extra bit of sealant at each of the head to block junctures, and then down here at the blocked oil pan juncture prior to the timing cover going on. Now comes the fun part of putting the timing cover down into place without actually touching it on anything that you shouldn't. Kind of felt it. There we go, it's on the guide pins. Yeah, let's here in the middle. Worked our way around. so I'm going to go around and get all these snugged into place. At this point, I've had to fight a little bit to get that power steering pump back into position and then reach through the holes to get the bolts in. But I finally got the power steering pump bolted back in. It wasn't hard, it just took me a little bit longer than I anticipated. So that's done. The crankshaft, I think I showed that going on. That bolt gets torqued to 74 foot-pounds plus 150, and it's a torque to yield bolt, so you'll want to replace that. The tensioners are torqued on at 43 foot-pounds. Those are all on and in place. At this point, I've got the evap solenoid down or underneath here by the air compressor. I've got that all bolted back in place and ready to go. I run some brake wash and chase it with some air around the backside behind the power steering pump there where the leak was, and cleaned that all up. Cleaned the lower plastic splash shield down underneath while I had it up in the air. So at this point, the top end of the engine can be buttoned up. So I am going to install the serpentine belt, put the motor mount and everything back in place. Now, the bridge that goes across the front of the block here, those bolts get torqued to 59 foot-pounds, and then the ones down here into the frame rail, or the chassis rather, those are 35, I believe. Yeah, 35 foot-pounds. So I'm going to go ahead and button up the belt, motor mount, and then I can get the valves, the solenoid valves and the sensors installed, the coolant hose, and then I've already got the thermostat and the lower radiator hose replaced on the other side, but I haven't put the ECM and all the wire loom and everything back in place, because once I get the cooling system tightened up, I'm going to actually go ahead and pull vacuum on it, make sure it holds vacuum and is sealed up good and tight before I button the rest of the stuff up. But at least with the engine sitting back down a little bit on the engine mount, on the motor mounts and everything, I should be able to have better access for the rocker covers and intake manifold and everything, and finish up the top here. So I have to also replace all the seals in the valve cover, or the rocker covers. So that's I'll have to do that over the bench, but you don't need to see me do that. It's just knocking the seals out, putting the new seals in around the spark plug standoffs. I guess I'll go ahead and put the spark plugs back in, and then as I'm putting everything back together, then I can put basically the top end back together, and then the intake manifold, new intake manifold gasket, and torque the intake manifold. Motor mount, upper motor mounts, everything's in, torqued in place. I've pulled a vacuum on the cooling system, and it held for about a half an hour or so while I put all that together. So then I went ahead and pulled coolant into the system, so the cooling system is full, and I can confirm no air pockets by pulling a vacuum on it like that. We are just getting ready now to do a final wipe on the rocker cover surfaces, and we'll be installing the rocker covers with the new can't get it out now. Anyway, there's new orange grommets there for all the fasteners. The OEMs are black. New gaskets and new grommets, or excuse me, new seals for the spark plug standoffs, or the wells. So these are getting ready to go on now. I'll put a little bit of sealant at the intersection of the timing cover and the heads at each of these 4 locations. I'll put a little bit of Seal Glide around these seals and slip everything into place. It doesn't require a lot of sealant, just a little bead on each of those spots, and then carefully slide it back into position. And line up and actually you can kind of almost keep it off the head there, just ever so slightly, till you get a couple of bolt holes lined, a couple of bolts lined up with the holes. Then start them in, and then double check and make sure, this is paramount, make sure you don't have any fasteners, or excuse me, wiring
stuck back underneath the rocker cover, because that'll be enough to ruin your day if you pinch a wire in there. Not only will you have a possible electrical problem, but you'll definitely have an oil leak. And these rocker cover also take and make sure the make sure all of your spark plug standoffs have fully protruded up through as well. I'm going to move the camera here so I can get around the back. Rocker cover's in place. I've run the fasteners down to just snug. Now, another good thing to remember is know how many fasteners, especially on these where they're blind, know how many fasteners you're supposed to be torquing and then count them off. Nothing worse than having a comeback and find out that you got one of your bolts you left loose and there's a leak or something. So just make sure you, just a little tip. Like I know there's 13 fasteners on this rear one and there's 15 on the front one. So I'll go through and make sure I've got them all accounted for as I'm torquing them. Now, the standoffs for the spark plugs, I just took a flat seal tool as I was setting it down on and just kind of fished it around. Having a little bit of seal glide on that really helped. But I just fished that around that seal and make sure it goes down over those standoff tubes without any damage to the seals. So also before you do it, I kind of run my hands around, make sure there's no sharp edges or burrs or anything on it. So, okay, let's go through and now you can use, I've got a 3/8 torque angle or tech wrench from Snap-on, the digital ones. They're really nice. I like them. I use the snot out of them. They do inch pounds as well as foot pounds. But on something like this where it's space, they can be a little more cumbersome. So I just like to switch over to my little 1/4 inch one and just kind of run around. Oh, that one, I guess I didn't run down to snug. So then you just kind of run around. I kind of like this small 1/4 inch drive ratchet just for that reason. Oh, there's a couple of them here that I must have not run them down to snug. I can feel that camera right over my shoulder and I know I'm going to bump it. So I am going to move that real quick here. All the fasteners are torqued. I've snapped the rear wire loom back into the holes in the rocker cover. The PCV, the breather hose is ready. All of the plug or the coil pack modules are ready. You've got the inlet air temperature and throttle body wiring all ready to go, as well as the vacuum line here. Do not forget all of your wiring for your VVT activation solenoids and sensors, and the plastic little retaining piece that goes with it. So one connector is down here and then has the plug or the strain relief that goes into the front of the head. Okay, come in underneath there. Double check and make sure there's no wiring in the way there. And take and just zip this down. Okay, all 15 of those are snug down. Grab a torque wrench. Okay, all 15 of those. Just run around them one last time. I've already installed the spark plugs, so the coil packs can go on next. All right, all the old gasket is removed, the intake manifold gasket. The new intake, or excuse me, the intake assembly is ready to go. Here's the new gasket that will snap into location there. Well, dang it, somewhere in there the battery went dead on the camera. So he got left off. I don't know, I was putting the intake manifold on. So the intake manifold was in place. There's my repair to the crankcase ventilation line. And the intake manifold, upper intake manifold bolts get torqued to 18 foot-pounds. Then I went through and reinstalled the power steering reservoir bracket and the reservoir, the surge line hose for the coolant goes over to the surge bottle. Installed the stud. Actually, I need to tighten that down real quick. Installed the stud for the cover that also holds the bracket on the intake manifold here. So there's a stud back here for the grommet, and then a bolt here that holds the surge line on. And there's a bracket that goes between them that holds this, basically a strain relief for a couple more lines and this wire loom. Okay, all that's back in place. I do a quick once over, make sure all the connectors are in. The battery can get connected now. I'm gonna clean that terminal up really good though first. And then I've got the air box in place with the air inlet temperature sensor and the mass airflow sensor installed. So basically, other than the oil change, which I'm gonna get this up in the air, do an oil change on it, and then it's ready to fire. So fired right up, there she is, purring like a kitten. Got fresh oil in it. I can smell a little bit of coolant coming on, dripping off that exhaust and stuff down there right now, but she'll smoke a little bit and burn off, but everything's running good. No indicator lights, purring like a kitten. So I will take this on a road test real quick, get it up to temperature, and then put the engine cover back on. All right, so just got back from a road test. Car purrs like a kitten, checked all the fluids, everything looks good, got up to operating temperature. Double checked everything underneath, no leaks. I wiped down a couple of drips of residual off of the plastic skids. But other than that, everything looks good. So another successful repair, and I appreciate you taking the time to watch. And if you have any comments, I welcome them, and thank you for watching.